Web Marketing That Works podcast, episode number 97, with today's guest, Darren Rowse.
Welcome to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Come behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments and listen in as amazing guests confess the truth about what really works. Now, here are your hosts, Adam Franklin and Toby Jenkins.
My name's Adam Franklin, and you are listening to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. This is the show for people who love marketing on the web, and it's where you'll be taken behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments. We'll look at the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we confess what's failed and reveal the truth about what really works. Now, today's guest is Darren Rowse. He is also known as ProBlogger, and he's been one of the pioneers of blogging, not just in Australia, but all over the web. And I personally have learned a lot from him and his blog and his event, and it was really cool to get him on the show today. And there's plenty of tips for beginners, but also your business bloggers who are sold on the idea of blogging, but their time's better off spent on the tools, doing whatever it is that they do, whether it's being a mortgage broker, writing business, writing loans, or whether it's an orthodontist who's better off treating patients. There's a few tips around that Darren shares, but I'll wait until the show officially starts for that. Let me just quickly say that this show is brought to you by our book, which is called Web Marketing That Works, and the free gift to you, our listener, is the 33 free marketing templates. You can get your hands on those at bluewiremedia.com.au/book. Now, a few extra things you should know about Darren. He has a whole bunch of ebooks for sale on his website. I've bought and read most of them. The one that we talk about on the show is 31 Days to Build a Better Blog, and another one that he co-wrote with Glenn Murray, the Copywriting Scorecard. I've got tremendous value from both of those. And he's got a traditional book in the dead tree format, as my friend Tim Martin likes to call it. It's called ProBlogger, Secrets for Blogging Your Way to a Six-Figure Income. Darren also runs the ProBlogger event, and I've been to a couple of these. I went to the one in Melbourne in 2012, and I went to last year's event on the Gold Coast. Really valuable experiences. You get to connect with a whole bunch of other people who blog, and it can be quite lonely being a blogger because not that many other people do it. They might think it's a bit strange, or they might have heard of it but not really understand what it is that we do. So anyway, if you go to the ProBlogger event, you get to hang out with all these other people who talk about WordPress and can talk about the number of readers they get and blogging and all this stuff that often, if you talk to your normal friends about, they just sort of look at you blankly. So I did really enjoy heading to that event. And of course, you actually get to meet people in real life who you may have been following online for years. Often there's a whole bunch of surprise people that you actually just, bump into at the morning tea table or whatever. Lots and lots of fun. So the final thing to know is that Darren has just started his podcast, and it's called ProBlogger with Darren Rowse. And he's actually taking us on that journey of what we need to do in those 31 days to kick your blog off. So look, that is a big enough introduction for Darren. Most listeners will obviously know who he is. He's been very prolific online for over a decade. So let's get on with the show. My name's Adam Franklin, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Darren Rowse, aka ProBlogger. How are you, Darren?
Well, thanks. How are you?
Very well, very well. Firstly, thanks for leading the way or paving the way with blogging, particularly with us Aussies. I know you've been on the global stage for many years now, but since the early days, you've really been proving what's possible in the world of blogging. So thanks on behalf of myself and our listeners. My first question is, what do you feel has changed since those very early days when you were starting over 10 years ago, probably 12 years ago now? What has actually changed? And is it harder or easier these days, do you think, to start a blog?
Yeah, I think when I started out, blogging was mainly being used for personal reasons. People certainly were using blogging to build their profile around certain topics, but they weren't directly monetizing too much back then. I think the earliest people I saw who were monetizing blogs were asking for donations. A few people still do that today, and I know of a few who do it almost to a full-time level today, but it was very early days on that front. It was, I guess, what we'd call today using your blog to indirectly monetize by promoting yourself, and certainly people were using it to, launch book writing careers or speaking careers and that type of thing. But what's changed, I guess, is we've seen more and more people monetizing their blogs directly, and in doing so, they're niching down a lot more and focusing upon specific topics for their blogs. There's still plenty of personal blogs out there and multi-topic blogs, people using blogging in that way for self-expression, and that's totally fine. But we're increasingly seeing people entering into blogging right from day one with a narrower niche and more intent to use the blog to monetize directly. And I guess that's because people have seen the success that other people have had. We see mainstream media now blogging and blogging in that way as well. So the models are there. In terms of whether it's easier, there's certainly more blogs around, so there's more competition today, but the tools are so much better and easier to use. I remember when I started out, I used Blogspot or Blogger as a platform, which was one of the only ones you could use without coding your own. And even to get comments on that, you had to run a script and know some HTML, and it was pretty hard to get anything up and running, which was a challenge for me with no technical background whatsoever. The tools now are so much easier, and there's so many great themes and plugins and all kinds of stuff around. And the other part, I think, is that because there are so many more blogs today, there's actually opportunities to grow to a bigger audience, I suspect, if it works. And so if you do get the links from other blogs, and if you do, guest post and put yourself out there, you can actually probably grow to a larger size potentially if it works than in the early days when blogging was not really, well, most people didn't know what a blog was. So if you mentioned to someone you wrote a blog, people had no idea, and so were much less likely to subscribe. So there's pros and cons today, I think, of having a blog.
So the technical issues aside, it's certainly a lot easier to plug and play with the blog themes and everything these days. But you actually think because there's so many other bloggers blogging, because there's so many other high authority blogs out there and people to connect with, you're saying it could potentially be easier or faster these days to increase that trajectory to a decent sized authority blog where you can actually generate a reasonable amount of revenue, possibly easier today than 10 years ago.
Yeah, particularly if you've got some sort of an existing network to leverage. So if you've got a business with customers, then you can launch to them, and they've all got their own social networks today. And so if you do something worth sharing, the potential for them to share it very quickly can really be quite quick, I guess, to grow. But if you are starting out from scratch and you've got no network, and you're going to have to work harder on some levels because there's so many competing voices. And I guess the challenge we face today, particularly when we start something new, is how do we distinguish ourselves and differentiate ourselves from the millions of other blogs out there? And every topic today has at least a blog already started on it. So it's hard to find that unique position, I guess.
Of course, because social media didn't exist back when you started. It had just come onto the scene when I started. So I guess that can accelerate things. But I guess every person already has their own personal network, don't they? Even if it's not necessarily a professional network. There's people within that, even if it's Facebook friends and LinkedIn contacts, that can help amplify the content if it's good enough.
That's right. And, that's how I first started out. Whilst there wasn't social networking back then, I had the emails of all my friends and family, and they were my first readers. None of them really hung around too long, but it did probably help because they all knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who was interested in what I was writing about. And so that type of word of mouth did have an impact. And I've seen that with my wife's blog over the last couple of years. Her readers were her Facebook friends initially, and then it became the friends of those friends and then the friends of their friends. So it kind of grew that way. And to this day, some of her close friends still read, but it's tipped over into strangers. And that's kind of a strange feeling when you've got these names and faceless names reading your blog. Yeah.
So it starts with your Facebook friends or your personal network, which I think is logical, but it's also a little bit scary for some people, isn't it? Because to publish stuff out onto the web and have a stranger read it, for some reason, isn't quite as confronting as writing something on your blog and then sharing it to people that know you. I mean, they can judge you, they can do all sorts of other things. It's a confronting experience sometimes, I think, putting stuff out there, but necessary, of course, isn't it?
That's right. And it kind of an odd feeling when you put something out there that you put so much time and energy into and a close friend doesn't read it or doesn't comment on it as well. So there's all kinds of feelings associated with it. And it just takes some time to find your feet and make peace with the different ways that people will react to you and what you write, whether it's a stranger or a friend. I think we all have our own insecurities and worries about how people will perceive us. So it takes time to thicken your skin a little and just get on with creating great content.
I like that expression, to make peace with the fact that other people will interact with it in different ways.
Yeah.
So in the early days, how much hustle is needed over and above sharing it with your own personal network?
Yeah, look, I think every blogger has their own level that they're willing to hustle, and that probably partly becomes from the amount of time that you've got, but also your personality and how willing you are to put yourself out there. I know some bloggers are quite shameless and will promote themselves every opportunity that they get, but a lot of bloggers, that's one of the insecurities, I guess, that they need to work on. But I think the key is to think really carefully about who you're trying to reach with your blog and do some work around that. And whether that's just writing a paragraph about who that potential reader is, and you might call that your avatar or your persona, or whether that's just having an idea in your mind that you're writing for people like you. Having thought about who you're trying to reach then puts you in a better position to try and go and find them. So as you're thinking about who do you want to read, ask yourself, what type of social networks might they be on? What type of blogs might they be reading? What type of podcasts might they be listening to? And once you've got a list of those types of places that your potential reader is, you can begin to think about, how could I have a presence in those places? So, are they reading another blog? Could you guest post on that? Could you become a commenter on that? These are ways that you can build a presence there, and the same with social networks. And every social network has a different type of reader that seems to be attracted to it. So where your potential reader is going to differ from blog to blog quite a bit. And it really is just about being useful in those places as much as possible, whether it's just leaving comments or trying to be interviewed on a podcast or appearing as a guest poster or just answering questions in a forum.
Now, on your new podcast, Darren, you mentioned some of the little things that you can do, those 1%ers that you did in the early days when some people said, no, that's not necessary or you're going too far. Can you talk us through some of the things that you did and the long-term impact that that's had?
Yeah, so, one of the examples that I gave in one of the podcasts in the first few days was emailing anyone who commented on my blog. So, that's a weird experience in itself when you get a comment from someone you've never heard of before or a friend, and you get an interaction, but it doesn't have to stop there. You can respond to that comment in comments as well and leave your own comment responding to them, but go take it the next level. You get their email address when they leave a comment, so why don't you shoot them an email? That seems like a really small action. That's just one person, but that one person has their own social network. And that one person, if they come back every week, over a year, is the equivalent of 52 people coming in the amount of visits that they have. And over that time, they could potentially tell hundreds of people about your blog. So I guess my philosophy has always been my readership grows one by one, and it's those small little interactions that I can have with people that add up to big things. And so, commenting, using your readers' comments in future posts to show that you read the comments and you value your readers, those little small things can have a big impact upon people. Leaving comments on other people's blogs builds a relationship potentially with those bloggers who could share your blog, but also their readers. So it's just small, tiny things. These things only take 30 seconds to do, but they can have a big impact upon people. And I've had, readers that I emailed in the early days of my own blogs who I know for a fact 12 years later are still reading my blogs and have told other people about it and have bought my ebooks and have listened to my podcast, and they become fans. They actually become advocates for you as well. So it has a massive impact.
I've actually noticed something similar because when we published our book last year, we realized that there's people buying the book, but they're invisible to us. We don't know who they are or what business they're in or whether they're in a job or what even inspired them to buy the book in the first place. And one of the things my business partner Toby's been doing recently is, well, we did a promotion of our book, but we encourage people to either, if they bought the book in the past, email us and we'll give them some bonuses. So that way we knew who they were. And new people who bought the book, we encouraged to, we got their details. And the reason for that was exactly that, to understand who our readers were. And Toby's been giving them a call to thank them for buying the book. And aside from the fact that people go, oh, wow, an author's actually giving me a call, it's been so powerful for us because we can really we're getting much more clarity on these people who were previously unknown. You know, they actually have this profile and, you know, we're beginning to flesh that out. And now we can create more and more content for that buyer persona or that avatar. But also, as you say, it turns it into a relationship. And, you know, hopefully they're still reading our material in 12 years' time as well. That would be such a compliment. But
I mean, the people that you have any kind of personal interaction with, whether it's a comment interaction, an email, a phone call, meeting them at an event, they're significantly, like exponentially, much more likely to come back again and to become engaged and go to that level of becoming a raving fan. And I've seen this particularly with our events. When someone comes to our event, you suddenly see them commenting on posts, and they may have been reading for a long time, but they've never commented. And they start sharing your posts on their social networks. And it's amazing, like, to see the difference before and after any kind of interaction that you have with people. I mean, what author rings their people who buy their book? I've never, ever had an author ring my book. That makes a massive impression. And that's the type of thing that you would tell other people about. You know, this book author rang me. I'm going to tell people about that. And that spreads the word. So going the extra mile has a massive impact.
So people coming to your event, it's like throwing fuel on the fire. It's kind of fascinating to think that they could have been reading your material and have been so familiar with what I guess they know about you, but you don't know anything about them. And then when you connect in real life, it really just accelerates or amplifies that relationship.
For sure.
So a lot of people just get not trapped, but, you know, stay online. How important is it, do you feel, to actually press the flesh, whether it's running your own event or turning up to other events where fellow bloggers or fellow readers will be?
Yeah, I think it, like you just said, in terms of talking to them, you learn so much. And so that was probably the thing I loved the most about our first event, was that I suddenly had real people in my mind as I was writing content in future. I was able to base blog posts upon the questions that I'd been asked, but also the situations that I knew they were in. And by knowing my reader rather than just having this avatar of them, it personalized my writing so much more as well. And so that was important, but it didn't start for me with running my own event. It started with attending tweet ups and, you know, meeting people at other people's events. And I guess that was the first step for me. And that was a less threatening way to do it, but certainly running our own event, it's taken things to the next level to a degree that I never would have imagined. It also gives you the opportunity to create a whole heap of content as well. So our event, we record all our content, and that gives us all kinds of opportunities to repurpose that and share that and base future blog posts or podcasts upon it.
In fact, I remember one of those tweet ups. There was one that you hosted in West End in Brisbane, I think in 2009, and I rolled up to it and I met yourself and Yarrow Starek and a bunch of other people from the blogging community, and it was the first time that I'd actually connected with some of these people that I'd known of online, and I remember leaving feeling, wow, they're human beings. I've met them, and it was cool. It was inspirational, but it was cool just to see people doing the same stuff, you know, further ahead on that particular blogging journey, like you and Yarrow are compared to me, and especially at the time. But it was just such an easy thing to do, to turn up to an event like that, and had such a profound impact, I guess, on my confidence and my writing, and, you know, sticking with it long term. So I guess that's a really useful strategy, either hosting them or turning up. So the next question, Darren, is, I know there's a lot of passion, or what I call maybe passion bloggers, people who are really passionate about the topic. They want to write a blog, they want to express themselves, without necessarily, well, I guess they'll worry about the monetization later, and I'll get to that in a future question. But let's talk about like the business bloggers, or the more, what I might call strategic bloggers. Like they've got a business, they know that there's benefits to blogging, but they don't have a lot of time. For example, they might be a dentist or an orthodontist or a mortgage broker whose time is most valuable spent either with patients or with clients writing business or operating on people. Now, they don't necessarily have, the 2 or 3 hours a day or an hour a day or whatever per week. But what advice would you give to them if they are sold on the power of a blog, but they don't necessarily have any spare time, or if they did, they're better off being on the tools rather than blogging?
Yeah, look, it's a tough one. And I know, I guess many businesses struggle with that. They are sold on that idea. And whether they're a solo entrepreneur or even a business with lots of people, there's a cost associated with creating content. And I guess it's partly about prioritizing it. If you are sold on the idea, you need to put that time aside to create content. It doesn't just happen. But I mean, for me, there's just a few things I guess you can do to maximize your time. Personally, I batch write a lot of my content, so I write more than I need in a sitting. So on Monday mornings, for instance, I'll sit down and write 3 or 4 posts if I can, and then use that over the next week or 2 weeks. So you don't have to publish what you create straight away, and batching that way and brainstorming ahead of time. So one of the things we did in the podcast this last week was put aside time to create 10 blog post ideas. And by doing that ahead of time, before you sit down to write, you cut down the time you need when you sit down to write. And I find it's a whole heap easier to come up with 10 ideas in one sitting than 10 ideas in 10 sittings. A lot of bloggers waste a lot of time that way. So those types of things can really help. But I guess also it's about trying to build into your weekly rhythm the mindset that the things that you are doing could also be content. So the phone calls that you're having with people, if you're always being asked the same question, that's a blog post, answering that frequently asked question. You've got a phone in your pocket with a camera in it, capturing you doing something that you do every day. You might actually find some of those things that you do every day that you think you take for granted, other people might find them interesting. And so it's partly about just getting into the mindset of that. And so for me on ProBlogger, a lot of the things I do every day, I could screen capture those things and there's a blog post just while I'm doing my normal work. So you want to sort of get into that mindset of just always be looking for opportunities to capture things. And the other part of it is storytelling. And so if you've got a business and you're interacting with clients, those interactions could be stories that you could tell, but also your clients' stories could be things that you could tell as well. And actually getting your clients involved in your blog, probably not if you're a doctor and there's some privacy issues there, but I know of numerous businesses who interview their clients, they interview their staff, they tell the story of how a product was developed. So these types of things could be interesting to other people. And so it's about, I think the more you do it, the more you start to spot those opportunities to capture the things that you're doing to turn them into posts.
And how about then more the passion bloggers who haven't quite worked out the business side of things yet, but have the time and they love writing? What are some of the other parts of, I guess, the business blogging ecosystem that they can be working on to complement the blog and to actually create products, for example, that fit in with that ecosystem?
Yeah, so most of the bloggers that we interact with probably come from that perspective. They start blogging because they love a topic and they just want to talk about it, and then they realize that it's taking up a lot of time, and how do they sustain that because it's taking them away from a job or other commitments that might earn an income for them. So I guess it comes over time, and there's probably different stages. Some bloggers will start out with trying to find advertisers for their blog, but that's always going to have a bit of a ceiling to it unless you can grow a massive audience. We encourage people, I guess, to always be thinking about what sort of product could we create for our readers. And the way I've done that is through ebooks and courses, and I guess repurposing that content into more organized volumes for people and up-to-date volumes, for instance, in an ebook that is more convenient for someone than them having to trawl through 300 blog posts to get the information. So yeah, you've got to be smart, and I guess it's partly a mind shift, and this is something I needed to do a year and a half into my own blogging, is that I'd been blogging about the things that interested me, but it was taking a lot of time. And so I had these dreams of it becoming a business one day, but wasn't actually doing anything to make it a business. And so I had to start treating it as one. And that was the day that I started to ring potential advertisers. That was the day I started to think more strategically about growing my audience and doing, some of those hustling things that we were talking about earlier, putting myself out there. And that also led me to start working on creating a product, my first ebook.
Okay, so you've got the blog and you create a product that helps serve your audience too. I mean, are people buying that book straight off the blog, or is there an in-between nurturing process for them to then make that purchase?
Yeah, people purchase my ebooks for different reasons. When I first started them, a lot of my readers bought the ebook, I think, because they wanted to say thank you for the content that I'd given them for free already. And it was almost this reciprocal kind of purchase. I'd been building trust and a relationship with them over time. And so some people will buy from that. Other people will buy from a Google search for a particular information on a particular topic. So yeah, it's kind of strange, the motivations that people have, but I think most people buy it out of the relationship that you have. So I think for me, a blog is a tool that enables you to build likability and trust with people, and that will lead to a purchase in many cases.
And what role does email marketing play in the sales component and actually getting people to buy versus the blog?
Yeah, so a lot of people promote primarily on their blog. We ask for the sale primarily on email. We certainly do have blog posts with calls to action in them announcing a new product, but they do not convert anywhere near as well as when we send out an email. So my number one goal when you land on my main blog, Digital Photography School, is to get your email address and to build a relationship with you through email. So that's the number one way that we drive traffic every week through our newsletter. But when we do launch a product, that's the number one way of driving, getting the sale. And so I think we did the stats. It was something over 90% of our ebook sales when we launch a product come from emails. And the other 10% come from blog posts, social media, and our affiliates. So those three things don't drive a whole heap of sales for us. Email's really the best place for it. And so we use the blog more to, I guess, become known and to create content that gets shared, but also that is useful to people over time. And if we do use the blog as part of the launch, we use it more to build credibility of the author of our ebook. So we might have our author of our ebook do an interview or showcase some of their images or talk about why they've written the ebook, but we don't do a hard sell usually on the blog itself.
And so what sort of technical mechanisms are you using in terms of converting people onto your email list? Are you offering a lead magnet, or are you promising like a short course on blogging or digital photography? What's the incentive to attract people onto that email list?
We haven't really done much in the way of lead magnets, and that's partly because it's worked without it. We do use a pop-up, and that works incredibly well. I know some people find them annoying. We have a fairly gentle one in terms of it takes a little while before it appears, and it only ever appears once. Once you close it, you don't see it again ever. So we're kind of trying to respect our readers on that front, but it does convert very well. So that's one thing that we do use, and we try in that pop up to show the benefits of subscribing. And then we do mention the newsletter numerous times throughout the blog. Having said that, we're kind of at the point where we want to start testing some lead magnets as well. So I guess I'm a little wary about, giving it a free ebook if we're selling ebooks. That's one of the reasons we haven't gone with that, is that we don't want to build this expectation that we give ebooks away when we're selling them. So we'd need to call it something else and perhaps format it as something else. But I think that can certainly work quite well.
Interesting. And a very important point for listeners to appreciate is that the blog itself is excellent, but the money comes from the email list. So 90% of Darren's sales are coming from email promotions and social media, the blog, everything else put together, and affiliates makes up that final 10%. And one of the previous guests on our show, Glenn Murray, he was telling the story of how you wrote a ebook together a few years ago. I think it was the copywriting scorecard, and I've got a copy of it myself, but he said he really saw the power of email when you did the initial promotion, and there was sales coming in, virtually every second for the first sort of hour, and then they still came in thick and fast for the next 24 hours, and then he was just like totally blown away. So I think hearing that and him sharing that story on one of the previous episodes of this podcast just goes to show that a blog is an important part of the overall ecosystem, but you need those other building blocks in order to actually turn that into a business that generates revenue.
Exactly. And I think a lot of bloggers sell themselves short by not either collecting the emails or not using them. And that's the other part. I see a lot of bloggers who have these calls to action to subscribe, and they've got hundreds, if not thousands of people who have, and then they just never email them, or they only email them once every 6 months and when they've got something to sell. And whilst it takes a lot of work to keep your list warm, it's so important to be sending them useful content between the calls to action to buy.
And I think it's often, as I think you spoke before about mindset shifts, that sometimes people feel uncomfortable asking for an email address or uncomfortable asking for the sale. But when you view it as, well, there's an opportunity to deliver this person more value, and it's my obligation to give them the option to keep in touch, to have direct access to the new information when it comes out, and the opportunity to invest in the more premium content, because you can take them on a journey and take them to a better place through a commercial relationship. I think when it's viewed that way, it can help people transform their way of thinking, instead of it being, well, I'm taking from somebody, I'm taking their money or I'm taking their email. You're not. You're actually delivering value and you're helping them achieve even more. And it's our obligation, I feel, as marketers, is to give people the opportunity to go on that journey with us.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'd like to make money from my blogs, but my ultimate goal when I started blogging was to help people. And I know I can help them so much more if we journey together over time. And if I've got an ongoing relationship with them. I know for a fact that people who've been reading for over a year had more transformation as a result of what I've done than the people who've, come every now and again and when they think about it. So, even just from a making the world a better place perspective, if you can get some way of hooking them into a regular communication with you, you've got much more chance of success in changing their life in some way. And that's, for me, that's a big motivation.
And from a paying for content point of view, Glenn Murray again, I have actually bought his book, SEO Secrets, many, many years ago. And I share this story in my book. But I bought his SEO Secrets ebook and I implemented what he said in the book, and it transformed my Google results. Like, I was ranking for powerful, hard to rank for keywords. And once I'd actually done that, I noticed on my server that I had already had a copy of his ebook on my server from a year beforehand. So I'd been given it for free by somebody. They'd emailed it to me, and they probably shouldn't have, but I actually had that ebook on my computer for a year. But it was only when I paid for it, I paid $79, and it was only when I paid for it that I was ready to take action and that I was invested in it enough. And those keywords have gone on to be incredibly, incredibly valuable for my business. So I begged the question, which had a bigger impact on me paying, Glenn charging $79 for the ebook and me paying it versus the free one that I got. Well, of course, it's that $79 one, because once you pay, you're invested and you're ready to take action. So that story to me serves to show that by charging your customers for certain information, you're actually helping them get a much better result than either not asking for the sale or giving it away for free.
And we see the same thing with the event. When people invest to come to the event, we try and keep it as cheap as possible, but they're still got to fly there and accommodate themselves. And it does add up, but it's the people who actually go to that effort and make that outlay. They've, I guess, got more skin in the game. They're more invested in it, and so need to get a return and are much more motivated on some levels to make what we teach happen. And so, yeah, I think it's a really important lesson.
So one final question, Darren, is about scaling a blog beyond just being a single author blog. Now, I know you've done that for ProBlogger and Digital Photography School. It's not you writing every single article. Can you talk through the transition from you being the primary blogger to the actual process of attracting guest bloggers or regular contributors and managing editors and the impact that that's had?
Yeah, so probably the best example for that is digital photography school, where I always had that idea in my mind. But for the first year on that blog, I created most of the content simply because I didn't have any readers to draw on to write some content for me and do user-generated content. I had to build up that readership, and also because I guess I wanted to set the tone of the blog as well. And I had enough content ideas to keep it running for a couple of years. And so I went through the exercise when I started that blog of, I guess, brainstorming. I brainstormed 200 ideas to write about on that blog, and that served me for the first 2 years. And the exercise I used to do that I outlined in our 11th podcast episode just a few days ago, but it was essentially identifying the change I was trying to bring in my readers. So creating an avatar of who they were now, and then dreaming about who they would be once they'd read my blog. And so who they are now is people who have cameras, who are stuck in automatic mode, and who they'll become is people who have full creative control of their cameras. And then I just filled in the gaps. I brainstormed what would they need to know to get from point A to point B. And that created 200 ideas for me. Things like, what is aperture, what is shutter speed, but also how do I get more confident? How do I hold my camera? Some of the technical things. And so that was the first 2 years of the content on that blog. And I used that 2 years, I guess, to also build an audience. And the first foray into getting other people to write for my blog came from me approaching my most prolific commenters and the people I saw responding to my articles who knew what they were talking about. We also started a Flickr group and a forum in those 2 years. And again, the people who were the most prolific writers in that forum and contributors, and the people who were obviously knew what they were talking about, I approached them directly and said, hey, would you turn that comment you left into a blog post for us? I'd love to feature it. And I offered them, basically the kudos of writing on the site and a little bit of traffic back to the site. So it was a guest post. Over time, I identified of those guest posters, the best ones of those, and then started to offer them to be paid writers if they wrote one article a month. And so it was a really gradual transition. I also started to have a tab in our navigation area saying, write for DPS, and talked about some of the benefits of being a guest poster. And so naturally over time, the more you start featuring other writers, the more people start to wonder how they could also contribute. And so that started to build a culture of people contributing to the site. And to this day, it's now 9 or so years later, we now have a team of guest posters who still continue to volunteer from time to time. But we also have a larger team now of people who write regularly on the site. And so most of them commit to writing at least once per month, some of them once per week, some of them at times even more than that. And I've now hired an editor to kind of oversee that side of it. But that's taken 9 years to get to.
Nice. Because, of course, as you're starting out blogging, it can be very valuable to guest blog for free for a high authority site like Digital Photography School in order to get that backlink and that burst of traffic and that recognition within your community. It can help fast track your personal blog, your own blog's traction and trajectory by actually blogging around on other people's sites.
Yeah, for sure. And we certainly have a lot of people approach us to appear on the blog. The challenge for us is trying to work out their motivations and work out whether they're going to be good enough quality, because a lot of people do submit articles that are just rubbish, or they're submitting the same articles to 10 different sites. And so you end up with multiple versions of the same thing all over the place. So yeah, you've got to be careful when you use guest posting as a way to build your own profile, but it certainly can be really effective.
Awesome. Now, you've talked a lot about all the different things that we can be doing with blogging on your podcast. Do you want to just share with listeners where they can find that and what you talk about on that blog so that we can all continue on this blogging journey?
Yeah, so people can find me at ProBlogger.com. That's kind of a portal, I guess, of all the different ProBloggery type things, including the ProBlogger blog and the podcast, which we just launched a couple of weeks ago now. And also our ebooks. We've got 4 or 5 ebooks, one of which you mentioned before, the copywriting scorecard, but also 31 Days to Build a Better Blog is probably the one that sold the most and has been most popular. It's a series of 31 different things that you can do on your blog to build good blogging habits. We're actually running through those 31 things on the podcast at the moment as well.
Fantastic. And that was actually one of the first ebooks that I bought when I started my blog back in 2008. That 31 Days to Build a Better Blog. So it was well worth it, and I implemented a lot of it in the book, not all of it, but a lot of it, and it got us off to a really good start. So Darren, thank you. Good luck with the podcast and the event and everything else that you're doing. Thanks for leading the way on the blogging front.
Cool. Great to talk to you, Adam.
Likewise. See ya. As I've said at the start and during the show, I've learnt so much from him. He's proven that it's possible. He started out, he just started, he didn't know exactly every single step of how to create a highly profitable and widely read blog. He just started. And whether you're a passion blogger who wants to grow an audience and then figure out what to sell them and how to monetize it, or whether you're a business owner who already knows what it is that you sell and you want to build a blog in order to attract more people into your business, it doesn't matter. The key is, as I've discovered, is to actually just start, because you can't possibly know everything at the very beginning. But what's important is that you just take that first step, set up the blog, or if you've got a blog but you haven't actually published any articles, because hitting that publish button can be quite scary sometimes. Hit the publish button, get it out there, and just remember, at the start, not many people are going to read it. So if it's not brilliant blogging or a brilliant article, it doesn't really matter, because, as you said, share it with some family and friends. Start small. Maybe just start with your immediate family. Send it to your brother or your parents or whatever, and gradually build up the confidence to share it with your friends on Facebook or your contacts on LinkedIn. Because all of us have hundreds of people in our personal networks, and if they're not going to read your stuff, then who will? So use that sort of semi-safe ground semi-safe, I say it because it's totally safe if you show nobody, but of course you're not going to grow. You're not going to get any feedback, positive or negative, if you don't publish it. If you put it out there, then you expose yourself to criticism, you expose yourself to compliments as well. And it's really when you're writing or your blog articles, whether you publish podcasts or videos on the blog post, it doesn't matter. But when you publish it and it intersects, collides with the marketplace, that's when you get real feedback. That's when you can actually make an impact. That's when you can start actually improving it and growing your audience and getting better. So I really found that a valuable take home. Plus, do the hustle, do whatever you're comfortable with. Of course, the more you can hustle, I think the more it's going to work. Doing those things, like you said, reaching out to readers and thanking them or sending them an email, that's a very easy hustle because it feels like you're just being kind and you're connecting with readers. That's a lot more comfortable to a lot of people than reaching out to A-list bloggers like Darren and saying, hey, Darren, can I write for you or can you link to my blog? That can be quite confronting because, of course, you expose yourself then to rejection. So start small, but reach out to people, get to know your early readers, or if you haven't done it yet and you have an existing blog, try reaching out to your readers. I liked his idea of getting people who are your most prolific and knowledgeable commenters, getting them together, inviting them to maybe contribute a post of its own as opposed to just a comment. And the most exciting thing that, or for me personally, because our Blue Wire blog's been around since 2008, is the idea of scaling it up beyond just Toby and myself. We do have regular contributors, but not that regular. There's no sort of structure around it yet. So we're really excited to have Will Blunt from Blogger Sidekick helping us get that structure around the blog, get a team of regular contributors. He'll be contributing, and we'll have a set publishing schedule week in, week out. And even though we've been consistently publishing content, it hasn't actually been at set intervals, and it hasn't been to the level of detail where people can know what to expect, each day or each time we publish content. So really excited to have Will on board. He's been one of our best, well, he's been our best guest contributor for the blog. So really excited to take that relationship further and have him look after all that we do on the blog. So I guess we'll use this as a shout out. If there's people, if you're listening to the show and you like to blog about anything web marketing related, potentially you'd like to write for our blog. And of course, we can provide that backlink. We can provide that hopeful traffic spike for you. And in exchange, you can get to share your content with us and share it with our readers. So it's win-win for everybody there. So if you are interested, as always, whether it's for that or for a question or feedback in general, send me an email at adam.franklin@bluewiremedia.com.au. And if you do want to be a guest blogger, let us know. We'll check out your work and hopefully we can guide you to creating a really good value quality piece for the blog, which would be of great value to us and where we can certainly provide that exposure to you, the blogger. So look, with that, I'm going to call it a day. If you have enjoyed the show, and I hope you did, you can, well, firstly, there's two things. One, you can download up 33 marketing templates from our book, which is called Web Marketing That Works. Head to bluewiremedia.com.au/book and download those for free. And finally, we would love it if you left us a review on iTunes. Whichever country you're in, it would be much appreciated if you just dropped us a review, and that helps our visibility on iTunes. So it means more listeners and more good quality guests like Darren that we can get on the show. So with that, thank you, and I'll see you on the next show. See ya.